Well, good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Alexander in the Congressional Western Caucus. They have advocated for agriculture in rural communities for more than 30 years. In this week's Champions of Rural America, we're getting an update on the latest efforts to protect land while also promoting development. Congresswoman Harriet Hageman of Wyoming joins us now. Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time. A pleasure. I know that you have proposed bills that are aiming to address the balance between federal land management and state control over natural resources. Maybe expand on that a bit and how you plan to do that.
Well, there's a couple of things. One of the bills is no net gain. Right now, the federal government manages and owns about 612 million acres. And that is not the plan that our forefathers had in terms of federal ownership. And what we've seen over the years is a real lack of proper management of those resources. I think we can trace a lot of this just using the Forest Service as an example. We can trace this back to the 2001 roadless rule that denied access, management, and use to 58.5 million acres of National Forest Service lands. In the intervening 25 years, what have we seen? Catastrophic forest fires and insect infestations. And that is just one example of where the federal government has really failed in terms of land management. So what I advocate for is, number one, we need to get rid of the roadless rule, and we need to go back to active management of our National Forest Service lands and get back to the foundation for which they were even created. They were created under the 1897 Organic Act to provide a continuous supply of timber and a continuous supply of water. So many people, including the radical environmentalists and some activist judges over the years, have tried to convert our national forests into national parklands, which was never the intent. So those are just some of the issues that we're trying to address, is that the bad policies coming out of Washington, D.C. have real impacts on those of us in rural communities.
Yeah, and let's talk about that impact, your land use initiatives, the effect on local economies, especially when we look at industries like ranching and coal.
Well, absolutely. And again, a lot of that comes back to overregulation coming from Washington, D.C. You can point to things such as NEPA or the Endangered Species Act that, again, have been weaponized against rural America to try to prevent us from being able to construct pipelines, being able to construct much needed reservoirs, being able to actually better manage these resources. And, grazing, you can see how over the years, our grazing on both BLM lands as well as National Forest Service lands has consistently ticked downwards as the regulations and the administrative philosophy from Washington, D.C. has been one of non-use and non-management rather than active use and active management. And I just happen to be a person who believes that we can actually manage these resources very, very well. At the same time, we can turn them into productive commodities that benefit all Americans.
Well, Congresswoman, of course, a multi-generational Wyoming native. When you mention, of course, the No Net Gain in Federal Lands Act, a little bit more specifically, and for people who may not understand, when the government takes hold of some acres of land, and you had mentioned, 612, I think I saw 640 million acres possibly, predominantly out west. How this restricts the federal government taking more acres, and if they do, that they have to give up some acres. Maybe explain that a little bit.
Well, sure. The reality is that when the federal government controls the land, they control much of our means of production and economic development. I'll just give you one example. Under the Biden administration down in Texas, they've been trying to expand the Muleshoe natural resource area. Right now, it's about 7,000, a little bit less than 7,000 acres. Under the Biden administration, they wanted to expand that area to over 700,000 acres. In other words, a tenfold increase. Well, the vast majority of those acres are currently privately held. They produce cotton, they produce livestock, they produce all different kinds of things. But the other thing that they produce is they produce taxes for the local economy so that the counties and the state can build roads and provide services and support schools and support businesses and things like that. What happens when you get a national wildlife refuge that is expanded of this magnitude, you're really taking economic development and opportunity out of the community entirely. So that's just one example of where the federal government has tried to expand its federal footprint in a way that absolutely does not benefit anybody in those communities, except for the few who might make a killing off of selling their land. But that's a one-time sale. And then for the rest of eternity, essentially, that community is left destitute because the federal government doesn't really generate revenue on those lands. So I don't see a reason to expand it. In addition to which, the National Wildlife Refuge facility, that they have about a $2.5 billion maintenance backlog. In other words, they're not taking care of the lands that they already own. We don't want them expanding that footprint even further.
Well, you had mentioned the NEPA exemption bill. I want to talk about the long-term implications of streamlining federal reviews for energy and mineral projects, especially under the NEPA exemption bill. Speak a little bit about that as well.
So that's exactly what we're doing. We need to have permitting reform. The reality is that if you were to go get a 404 permit or you have to go through a NEPA review, it can take years, if not decades, and it can cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to do projects that everybody in the community want and that we need. So whether it is construction of manufacturing facilities, or again, construction of pipelines, or the construction of reservoirs, which California so desperately needs right now. So between NEPA and ESA and California, the California Coastal Commission, between all of these regulatory agencies, they really prevent us from being able to access, use, and manage our natural resources for the best interest of the American people. So really what I am doing, both as the chairman of the subcommittee on water, wildlife, and fisheries, I also sometimes wave on to the federal lands subcommittee. I'm a part of the Natural Resource Committee. I'm consistently looking for ways that we can make government work smarter, not harder. We can make government work better for the American people. We always have to go back to the fact that under our form of government, it is a government of, by, and for the people. I do not believe that our job as representatives is to make people's lives miserable or block access to the resources that they own. And so my philosophy is we can manage these resources very well, very effectively, very environmentally sound, at the same time that we can generate revenue for our people, for people who need jobs in our communities.
I got to tell you, Congresswoman, we just had a rancher from California who had actually called in the other day complaining about the water issue out there. Uphill battle. I mean, you have everything pretty much aligned, and the next steps in getting this all done. How do you see this playing out?
So one of the things that we have to recognize with California especially, and one of my priorities as the chairman of WWF, is that we have got to be building additional water infrastructure. California has the same water infrastructure in place today with 40 million people that they had in the 1960s with 16 million people. Their leadership has utterly failed the citizens of California in terms of growing and expanding and developing the resources that are necessary to serve that magnitude of humanity. So they can talk all they want about being, the fifth largest economy and a larger economy than many independent countries. That's all true, but in a lot of ways, they're a third world country because they are not providing those resources that you need to have for a civilized society, and one of them is water. We saw that play out last fall when you had those catastrophic forest fires and their fire hydrants were sucking water. Now, I know that they want to look at the Colorado Compact as the solution to all of their problems, but even if that river were to actually run at 15 million acre feet a year, that would mean about 7.5 million acre feet would be available for the lower basin states, including Arizona, Nevada, and California. That's not a long-term solution. They need to find better technology for purposes of constructing desalination plants, and then they also need to be building reservoirs. And I'm hoping to push that issue, as I am the chairman of the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee, to be looking at additional Bureau of Reclamation projects. There are 2 other projects that they've talked about out there, including increasing the capacity of Shasta Dam, as well as the Patterson project. Both of those are good ones. There's another one called the Sites program, or the one that they're looking at for a project. And I think that they need to be looking at all of them. What's interesting to me, though, is they oftentimes talk in terms of like 80,000 or 100,000 acre feet. That's not enough. That isn't enough to meet their demand. They're going to have to get over some of this nonsense and actually construct facilities for the benefit of their people.
Congresswoman, we thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, out of time, but we do appreciate you taking the time to be here with us at RFD TV, and we thank you for all that you do. Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, again, thank you.